Welcome back to Life Beyond the Ladder, a podcast created to help you design a second act you can't wait to live. I'm Dalisia Coppersmith, career strategist and midlife reinvention guide, inviting you to dream big and do what you love. Last episode, we talked about the arrival trap, and it's that strange, I think I called it a disorienting moment when you've climbed the ladder, you've checked all the boxes, and you arrive somewhere that doesn't quite feel like you expected it to. We talked about engineering a good breakup with that chapter that's ending. And I left you with a question. If the ladder disappeared tomorrow, what would you build instead? I hope you sat with that. And if you didn't, you have a chance to just jot it down because that's an important question for you to answer. If the ladder disappeared tomorrow, what would you build instead? I hope it stirred something important. Today, we're going to dig quite a bit deeper into a feeling that lives right alongside the arrival trap. One that's just as common, just as uncomfortable, and just as misunderstood. It's the feeling of being invisible. Maybe you've noticed it recently. The room doesn't quite light up the way it used to when you walked in when you were younger. You see colleagues get the attention, the best assignments, and more energy and interest from leadership. Often these are younger colleagues. So there's a difference. It might be subtle, but you're noticing. Maybe you make a recommendation or a suggestion in a meeting and it lands quietly, if at all. And then someone else says the same thing 10 minutes later and suddenly it's a great idea. We've talked before in my other podcast, Frontline Women, about how often this happens. But when it comes to midlife women, including I'll say 45 and above, this is even more prevalent. So you've excelled in your work for years, and somehow the spotlight seems to have moved on without warning. It's pointing you exactly in the right direction, just not the direction you might think. Because here's what I believe, and I have for years. It's just become more and more conscious for me, the more women that I've worked with lately. Visibility and value are not the same thing. And one of the most liberating realizations that a woman can have at this stage of her career is finally understanding the difference. The kind of attention that's fading, a lot of it was never actually about your work anyway. So let's be honest about what visibility has often meant for women in professional spaces. It's meant being noticed, being liked, being appealing in a way that had more to do with youth, energy, and a certain kind of social magnetism than with the quality of your thinking or the depth of your expertise. We live in a culture and we work in organizations that have rewarded women for being attractive and agreeable, at least as much as for being brilliant and capable. And somewhere in your 40s or maybe 50s, that particular spotlight starts to dim. Now, here's what I want you to hear. That is a gift. I mean it. The objectifying or paternalistic attention that followed you through the earlier decades of your career, you are free of it, my dear. The performance of likability, of accessibility, of being easy on the eyes and easy to be around, that exhausting invisible tax that women pay simply for going to work every day, existing in professional spaces. You don't owe that anymore. The room has stopped asking for it. And in its place is something much more interesting. Because while all of that was happening, while you were being watched and evaluated and reacted to based on things that had nothing to do with your actual capability, you were also building something quietly, maybe without anyone making a fuss about it. You were accumulating expertise, the kind that only comes from doing the work for a very long time, getting some things wrong, figuring out why, and doing it better. And you did this over and over in your career. And you still will. You have time left, most of you. You were developing discernment and the ability to read a situation, a person, a problem, and know what it actually requires. You were building a library of experiences that no 28-year-old in your organization has access to yet, no matter how talented they are, because that can only be built with time. You've been doing extraordinary work, my guess is. And a lot of it probably went unnoticed, not because it wasn't valuable, but because the culture around you has been busy looking at other things, other people. Here's where I want to challenge you, though, right now. That expertise, The wisdom, the discernment, you have the right to use it however and wherever you like, without apology. You don't have to wait for someone to formally acknowledge it or hand you a platform to stand on. So I want to prepare you for something. When you start doing that, when you start using your voice, your expertise, your experience more visibly and vocally, you're going to meet resistance, especially if you kind of felt yourself being put in a box and you muted your voice in meetings and all of that. Well, you're going to meet resistance when you come back out of the box. There'll be moments where your insight is dismissed or your experience is undervalued. But don't shrink from those moments. Relish them. It sounds strange, so stay with me and I'll explain it. The moments that you get that resistance are confirmation that you're operating at a level that makes some people uncomfortable, that your presence is no longer easy to manage, easy to flatter. You're not able to be redirected with a compliment. You're no longer performing and waiting for approval. You're simply being competent, clear, and completely unbothered by their reaction. And ladies, that's power. That's real power. Not the borrowed power of being the one everyone's eyes follow, but the earned power of being the one whose opinion actually changes outcomes. So, what do we do with that hard-earned attention? For most of our careers, we've been oriented outward, tracking how we were perceived, managing our image, making sure the right people see us doing the right things. And that's not vanity. I mean, it's survival. That's how career advancement works in most organizations. So we adapted to it because we had to. But this phase, this season, where the external spotlight has moved on, is actually an invitation for you to reorient, to stop tracking how you're being seen and start seeing clearly yourself. When you're no longer performing for an audience, you get your own attention back. You get to look at your work, your career, your life, and ask what you actually think about it. Not what looks good or what will be well received by other people. What's actually true, what matters, and what you want to do with the considerable capability that you still have. So this phase in your career is meant to stop you in your tracks. It's not meant to be comfortable. And stopping, actually, I think it's underrated because it's like the end of a really good book. You know that feeling when you're in the last 50 pages and everything's coming together, the threads are weaving, the stakes are clear, and you realize you're about to have to say goodbye to a world you've lived in for a while. There's something bittersweet about it, but it doesn't make you want to rush through it. You know, when we're reading the book, the ending of the book, we can feel it's coming to an end. We want to know what happens, but still we don't rush. It makes you want to read every sentence, to be fully present for the ending as it unfolds. That's where you are. So write this chapter well. And you know, endings that are written well set everything up that comes next, right? So the best final chapters don't just resolve the story, they open. They leave you with something to carry forward. Now, let's move into something else. We touched on it just briefly about the freedom, right? The freedom that this allows you. And specifically, the freedom in being underestimated. I think this might be the most underutilized advantage in the room when you're no longer the obvious one. You're not the shiny new thing that everybody's tracking and reacting to. You become something far more interesting. You become the one who moves quietly, the one who sees around corners, the one whose influence operates through relationships and judgment and insight rather than visibility and popularity. There's a specific type of power that belongs to the woman in the room who has nothing to prove. She doesn't need to be the loudest. She doesn't need to have credit in the moment because she's playing the long game. And she doesn't need to win every exchange or manage every impression. She can simply be the wisest person there and let that do its work in its own time. So, if you've earned that position, relish the moment right now. Find a way to have the calm confidence that I talk about quite often with my clients. Return to that. The women who step into this fully, who stop mourning the spotlight and start operating from that quiet authority, they're the ones who tend to have the most meaningful final chapters of their careers and the most exciting first chapters of whatever comes next. Being underestimated is an invitation. Accept it. As I did last week, I'd like to leave you with a simple question about a profound moment. What would you do if you stopped performing for an audience that has already looked away? Not what would be safe or well received, but what would you do with your expertise, your discernment, your decades of hard-won pattern recognition? If you stopped waiting and needing the room to notice, I want you to choose one thing. Choose one area of your work or your life where you are going to stop performing and start building, where you're going to own your expertise, maybe bring something fully to life and shine your own spotlight on it instead of waiting for someone else to shine their light in your direction. Doesn't have to be big yet, it just has to be real. Because most women don't realize the spotlight was always yours to direct. You've just been letting other people hold it. So take it back. Take responsibility for shining it on something that you care about. I'm Dalisia Coppersmith, and this is Life Beyond the Ladder. I'll see you next week.